Welcome back to our special edition of the Peace Through Strength podcast, brought to you by the American Security Council Foundation. I'm your host, Joy Vaterbeck, and with me today is our senior analyst, Lauren Sanford.
Nice to be here, Joy.
Thank you, Larry. And Charla Frederick, who is a teacher and a mother, and they are going to comment on an article that was in the Indian River Press Journal, a Treasure Coast newspaper, on Friday, October 18th. 2024. This is in the kids section, and it was written by Aminda Smith, who is an associate professor at Michigan State University. And she is writing on explaining communism, specifically targeted to kids. Larry, could you please give us a little of your thoughts on this?
Well, my first thought is it's blatant communist propaganda. But the thing that's disturbing to me, and by the way, Indian River is in Florida. We're in Florida near Vero Beach. The thing that struck me is it's geared for the children, and it's written in simplistic languages. And it describes basically a dream, a utopian dream of how humanity could be. It's almost sort of like the story in the Bible of the Garden of Eden, that everybody is happy, everybody shares with everything, but it bears no relationship to reality. And so to me, this article represents the corruption demonstrated through the Marxist progressive takeover of the media. And this newspaper is owned by USA Today, which is one of the largest daily newspaper chains in the country. And the corruption in the educational system. This is a piece written by a university professor who teaches also about communism in China. So she is full aware that in China, millions, hundreds of millions of people have died through the various communist programs of starvation, brutalization. Tiananmen Square, where they repressed speech, where they had the Great Leap Forward, the flowers, the 100 Flower program, the program they had to kill all the insects, which meant that all the birds, which meant the insects weren't killed. So she's fully aware of all the atrocities of communism. And yet this article just talks about what heaven will be on earth with communism and doesn't address anything about the atrocities committed by communism, not only in China, but in Russia. Hundreds of millions of people have died because of communism. And the most recent example of communism bringing people down economically is our neighbor to the south, Cuba. They've had blackouts twice now in the last couple of weeks. So wherever communism is, people suffer economically, politically, and spiritually. Religion is a no-no. They persecute religion. So to me, this article is an atrocious play by communist propaganda against our children. And the media allows it to happen. Nothing was mentioned about the atrocities. So that's my take on this article.
Thank you, Larry. And I did not mention at the beginning, but the American Security Council Foundation was established in 1958 to fight against communism in the United States.
Yes.
And obviously we are very well needed still today, 2024.
Absolutely.
So Charla, could you please give us your take as a teacher and a mother?
Yes. So I have a background in social science education. I taught American history, American government, taught about comparative politics, communism, but I also have 2 children of my own, 2 school-age children. And this article right here in the kids section of our newspaper is appealing directly to children who are idealistic. Let's be honest, we all know children are very idealistic. They haven't seen the horrors of the world, and that's a good thing. We want to encourage our children to love one another and to, be open to ideas. But this is playing directly on our children's idealism, our children's sense of fairness. When children are younger, their morality is based on equality. Mom, Dad, that's not fair. The fact that he got more than half of that slice of pizza. If you split a slice in half to share between your 2 kids, they better be equal, because your children will tell you right away if they are not the same exact size. And this whole article is reaching out to children and saying, communism is all about fairness, when in reality, we know from history that that is not what communism actually means in practice in anywhere that it has been implemented in the world. She has a simplistic, idealistic, and historically inaccurate view of communism. I want to go into some of the things that Miss Smith talks about directly in the article. She says things like communism, or a communist is someone who supports communism. Now, this is a children's article, so of course that's a very simplistic view or definition of what a communist is. But remember, our children under the age of, I would say, about 13 don't even know what communism is. And so this simplistic view, a communist believes in communism, that's going to mean nothing to a child when they first read that sentence. Then she says a communist believes that people should share the wealth. Well, that sounds nice to kids. Everybody's going to have equal shares. Remember that slice of pizza. Everybody's going to get an equal slice of pizza. So communists believe that there should be no one too rich, no one too poor, and everyone has enough to survive and have a good life. We all know that the reality is that nowhere has communism led to everyone having enough to survive and everyone having this great life. She says, communism, people work together to produce and distribute what is needed. Hundreds of millions of people killed. I don't think that communism has ever met the needs of every person in their society. She even admits that not all things are shared equally, but it's in a way that children won't understand what the article is saying. Finally, she says societies with communism may have home ownership. People may be able to own their own phones. The fact that she's saying that individuals may own their own phones, I mean, really, directly appealing to children there. Every child wants a phone. And you're saying, well, your government's going to provide you a phone if you're communist. But factories and farms where those phones and the food that you eat is produced, that's all owned communally. Collective ownership. And theoretically, this is a direct quote from this article, theoretically, communism should entail some form of democracy. Let me ask you this, Larry. Is there a country in the world that claims to be communist that has democracy?
Depends on how you define democracy.
In the American definition of democracy.
Western civilization, the answer is no.
Exactly. Then the remainder of the article goes into Karl Marx himself, of course, the father of communism. And she goes into the history that Karl Marx observed, but with no context. She says that Karl Marx viewed history as a history of a rise up of the oppressed that was usually violent. So even she admits that Karl Marx said this is usually done in a violent overthrow of the government. She talks about how class struggle, or that Karl Marx believed class struggle would lead to progress of our society. Factory owners were becoming richer while workers were struggling to provide food for their families. Now, of course, in the 1800s, industrialization was causing a lot of problems within societies. In Germany and England, in the United States, we can all recognize that there were, the process of industrialization was not an easy one anywhere in Europe or anywhere in the world, really. But again, it's all this idealistic view that, workers were going to rise up and overthrow, and everything's going to just work out just fine. Everybody's going to be happy. Everyone is going to be equal. That socialism is actually the first stage. This is a government run by workers as a way to overcome inequality. So the first step to communism is socialism. That workers take over the government and implement a forced takeover of factories and farms. And then the second stage is communism, where the government will just fall away magically. The people in government are going to give up their powers, and all people will work together collectively for the good of the economy, the good of each other. There'll be no rich, there'll be no poor, there'll be no ownership of anything. Everybody will just work together.
Everybody should be required to read Animal Farm.
Yes, I wholeheartedly agree. My children are 15 and 12, and both of them have read Animal Farm. Your children most schools don't require a reading of Animal Farm, so I encourage you to have your children read Animal Farm probably around 6th or 7th grade. I would say read it with them, discuss, talk about it, because they might not be able to pick up on all the cues in the book, but it is important to understand what communism actually is in practice.
Yes.
We can all be idealistic and we can say, oh, what a great idea that everyone is going to work together and there's going to be no greed, there's going to be no hunger, everybody's going to have a place to live. But the reality of history is that this doesn't work.
I think you hit exactly on that with the greed thing, because I was thinking that when Larry was saying about Utopia and the Garden of Eden, but even if you go back to Jesus' disciples, they tried communism basically and having collectivity, and it didn't work.
No.
Because greed's going to set in somewhere.
The human nature is what is.
Exactly.
Yes. And now the author's conclusions I thought were interesting at the end of this article. One is that current communist nations and parties are working toward communism, which...
There is no true communist state.
Okay, yes. And that no country has yet made the transition to full communism. But this is a direct quote. But many people still hope that transition will happen somewhere, sometime. Communists are optimistic that humans can one day create a more fair and equal society.
Thank you. That sums it up.
That pretty much sums it up. Thank you, Charlotte. We appreciate that. Thank you, Larry, for your thoughts on this as well. And I encourage our listeners, I don't even know if you can find it in this paper, but you can go online.
I want to specifically mention that you can go to Curious Kids.
US.
Yes, it's Curious Kids US at theconversation.com. And you will see this article directly on that website. These are things that your children are going to be exposed to in school, on YouTube, in different aspects of their life. So make sure that you are aware of what they are being taught.
Is this website part of Michigan State?
That's a good question. I pulled it up. I did not see it connected necessarily, but it is kids related. So
yes, and it's called the organization is Curious Kids. They may have capitalist articles on there. I am not sure. I'm not downgrading completely the website. I'm just saying, let's check these things out. Know what your children are watching, what they're reading, and open a discussion with them about the realities of communism.
And I think before we go, it should be mentioned too that in our state at least, there is a bill out that we do have to teach our children communism.
Yes.
The evils of.
The evils of communism.
Yes.
And that is Bill.
So it was passed by the Florida legislature in 2024, and that is SB 1264. Starting in the school year of 2026 to 27, students will directly have to learn about the history of communism, the atrocities, and the communist movement within the United States.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you to our listeners. And as I said in the beginning, as you can see, the American Security Council Foundation is still very much needed to talk to you about communism when you're seeing it in your local newspaper. So please consider donating to the ASCF. For as little as $10 a month, you can become a member and you'll receive our articles and a free subscription to Substack. Larry writes a lot on that. He writes a lot about Marxism and socialism in different communist states. So thank you to our listeners once again, and join us again next time as we bring you Peace Through Strength podcast.